Cool. Well, thanks so much for organizing this. First of all, it's super exciting. I been sort of vaguely involved in Tendermint for many years, and in Cosmos now for 2.5 years. And it's awesome for the first time that like so many people come together. So hopefully next year we'll have another one of those, but with 600 people, much bigger scale. So yeah, thanks so much for organizing this. And yeah, I'm really excited today that we have a bunch of our validators to talk a little bit about Cosmos and about the role of validators and the evolution of the network so far. So maybe let's get started here. Maybe just go around. Everybody can briefly introduce themselves, their company, and like why and how they ended up becoming a Cosmos validator. So do you want to go ahead?
Hi, I'm Florian. I'm from Staking Facilities. We're a staking as a service provider from Munich, Germany. We came to Cosmos about a little bit more than a year ago when we looked at the ecosystem and looked what's available, and I think that Cosmos from the beginning had a very clear definition of how staking will look like, and yeah, we liked it, so we started working on it.
Great. I'm Hendrik, co-founder of Certus One, and we're also staking as a service provider focused on security and compliance. And we got into Cosmos in the middle of last year, looking at a few platforms to build decentralized applications on top of. And I started batching on the Tendermint code, looking for bugs, and that's how we kind of got into it.
I'm JK. I'm the operations manager at bitfish. bitfish, since inception, has sort of changed into a more bigger scope project. So we decided to put all of our staking validator business under stake.fish, and so that's why I have the stake.fish shirt out here. We got our feet into validation because our founder, Wang Chun, who he believed that proof of stake is coming in a big way, and Cosmos was one of the chains that had a carefully thought out system, and it was one of the few that we thought would be worth one of the earliest to market, and so that's why we decided to validate on Cosmos.
Hi, so this is Aurel from Nokia Capital. Thanks for having me. We're coming from a proof of work industry, and we started researching proof of stake networks that we're going to launch soon, and we decided to ditch the whole proof of work operation that we're doing back then, and we're fully migrated to proof of stake now, and want to do a good job.
Cool, awesome. And yeah, just speak about myself. So I used to be part of the Tendermint team. So I was the kind of first non-developer there, and COO at one point, and then felt that was the end of 2017 that they had this design in the white paper, and there was going to be these validators, and they have this important function in the network, and it felt like nobody was working on it. So we started working on it back then. And of course, in the meantime, lots of people working on it, so there's a change in an incredibly fast pace. I think several of you mentioned that what appealed to you guys about Cosmos was that there was kind of a clear description, or a clear view of staking and how it worked, and the role of the validators. So how do you guys see the role of the validators? Maybe both in Cosmos, but also in proof of stake in general. I don't know, Florian, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So, on one hand, we have the actual work that we do as a validator is validating the blocks, obviously, but I think it goes further beyond. We have a role of educating people about proposals, for example, what impact do we have on the chain? Actually, I think it's way bigger than just running it, but the whole ecosystem relies on strong validators. And I think you can see that in Cosmos. Cosmos is so great right now because we have a very strong community, all around the world. We have a very strong Korean community, Thai, German, American, Canadian.
Romania.
Yeah, Romania, of course, yeah. So I think the responsibility is way bigger than just the technical service that we provide.
I would strongly agree with that. I think as validators, we're also ambassadors and developers. Like most of us validators have contributed in many different ways. It can be just a guide that was published. It can be a dashboard for staking, a block explorer, but like bug reports and all of this work on the protocol itself and spreading the message about the protocol itself. So I think that's also something we all feel strongly about.
And the fact that we validate on different chains also provides a lot of value because we're able to see proof of stake itself is still early on. There's a lot of parameters that needs to be hashed out. There's a lot of experimentation that needs to happen, and we as validators on multiple chains are able to then provide these knowledge that we accrue from other chains into, like, for example, Cosmos, and vice versa, where we see a lot of good parameters in Cosmos, and we try to take that knowledge out to other chains. So I think there's a lot of value in that.
So a lot of new chains, I think there's a kind of trend in the proof of stake chains with this idea of like you want like more validators and more nodes, right? And like the bigger the number, the better. And you know, you have things like Algorand and Infinity and you know Polkadot as well to some extent. What are your thoughts on this and the kind of like pros and cons of that, you know, tendency? Like maybe Aurel, do you want to?
I think the biggest issue for the coming stake networks will be staking token distribution and choosing the right validator set and also the number of validators that are validating that specific chain. So there's going to be a danger.
Anybody else want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think that there's chains that are just targeting totally different audiences. I would say there's Cosmos-like chains that are looking for validator sets of highly professional validators, but then just a few of them, because there are just a few of them. And I think we can find a concentration of the highest quality validators in the Cosmos Hub, and we've seen that pattern that newly launching chains that wanted to be like Cosmos reach out to Cosmos Validators, because that's where they can find technical excellence and quality overall. So, but obviously we also have other chains that are just aiming for huge decentralization with thousands of nodes, and I think they have totally different requirements. But I think that especially these chains with fewer validators but higher quality can often perform better and move faster than the others.
Yeah, I would also add that what you said, like the quality of validators that is available is like there's not that big of a set of validators who actually know what they're doing. So I think that some of the smaller validators will realize soon that it's not affordable to them to run a really secure network, and therefore I think chains that want to have like 200 really professional validators, they will struggle a lot to actually find them, because there aren't just that many on the market.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I think a lot about in this context is, you know, what does a market look like naturally? Like, where's a market where you have like 100 participants with the same market share? It doesn't really exist anywhere. So if you have the idea that there's going to be like 100 validators and they all have the same size, that just doesn't seem stable, right? Like someone is going to try to aggregate it somehow. And then, you know, it feels, for example, the logical thing to happen if you say you're going to have a lot of validators and economically incentivize such that, you know, let's say everyone gets paid the same. Well, of course you want to run many validators, right? So then maybe you'll have some that do it as a service. And so I think it would be very interesting to see that play out, where maybe on the one hand you have people trying to design systems that explicitly try to prevent, you know, people forming larger businesses, and then how people try to route around it.
I think just one thing to add there is that I don't think, I personally don't think decentralization should be considered by the validators in network power. I truly believe that decentralization should be measured through the distribution. Because, for example, on Cosmos, anyone could redelegate instantaneously. So if you act maliciously, or if you're down for too long that a staker feels uncomfortable, they could easily redelegate, and suddenly the entire ranking for the Cosmos network would look entirely different. And so I think networks should really think about token distribution a lot, a fair distribution a lot more than thinking about like, oh, how can we like entirely prevent a validator from accruing too much power. Of course, there's a threshold where you need to absolutely stop, yes, but I think token distribution should be considered of a more higher priority.
Yeah, that's actually a great topic to bring up, and something that's already been discussed various times in many forums is the kind of topic of decentralization. What exactly does that mean? What's the right level of decentralization? When is validator too big? Any thoughts on that debate and opinions?
I'm pretty biased here, so
you're like, don't worry about validator size, token distribution.
Just for a heads up, just 32.7% of the voting power on stage right now.
Right. So just to point out, not enough to hold the chain, or just fail.
Well, there's 37% of voting power up here, but we don't control it, right? So people, if I say something wrong right now, if I say Cosmos is stupid, then it would suddenly be probably like 30, right? So, and I think that's a big part of the decentralization is that many people can make the choices. Like it's us maintaining the whole thing, but many people have the possibility to decide who's actually sitting here, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, actually, and I think decentralization is not just about the power validators, as you mentioned before, but it's also about just how these validators operate. Because if they're all hosted in AWS, then we're all in trouble, because once Amazon decides that staking is not a business they want on their platform, the chain will halt. And it's also a lot about geographic distribution of the whole network, meaning not just nodes, but also legislations where the validator companies are actually located in.
Or suddenly Google goes down.
Or Google going down and validators suddenly stopping, which may or may not have happened.
Yeah, I thought they would have an infrastructure ready for that, right? I don't know.
And on that point, I just remember there was, Cosmos is only like 3 months old now, but I remember that was not so long ago, but there was a picture of a panel in Hong Kong, where you had like 80% of the Bitcoin hash rate on the panel. So it's a lot better with 32%. So another topic that has been discussed a lot is the question of kind of economic sustainability and model for validators. Any, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you guys think this is going to play out in the next year?
I am in the camp that thinks that the current layout of the land right now is going to look entirely different from 6 months from now, namely because there will be a lot more exchanges, custody services, and funds who will launch their own validator service. And when they do, some of these services will think of staking as a feature of their product, and their main revenue source is from their product, not from staking. And so, they really don't need the revenue from staking and will likely charge pretty low fees. So, once these guys enter, the entire market is going to look fully different. And that's what at least we're preparing for, those entrants.
Do you think this is a threat?
I don't think it's a threat, because they have no incentive to act maliciously, right? And arguably they might even, they probably have their own data centers, so they might have pretty good infrastructure team to support the network. I don't think it's namely a bad thing, but it could harm the independent validator. That's the threat potential.
I would say you need to find a niche for you if you're not that big. So you need to find things that you can provide to the network that they can. So, for example, building tools around staking, where they have an advantage because they already have the user base. If you look at the client exchange, they have all of that taken care of. But I think there's parts of the system where as a small company you can act way faster and way more like in the interest of the users, and I think that's exactly where you need to be.
Yeah. I also think there's, like, from our perspective, there's mostly going to be 3 to 4 categories of validators. Like, first category being exactly the custodians, exchanges, funds you mentioned. Second category being community validators, actual validators providing something to the general community, as we've seen quite a few at the moment that just build tools, contribute to the project, maybe even get grants from the foundations and build something and help grow the ecosystem. Or even build a project based on Cosmos SDK and airdrop tokens, like providing additional benefits to the delegators. I think this is going to be something where they can provide added value compared to these other actors. And the third, probably not as relevant for Cosmos, but for potentially a few other chains, just individuals, people that want to run a validator from the basement, something like this. I think that's the kind of categories that we're going to see, and you have to provide an added value really to stand out in this field.
So let's say we do end up in a space where, because yeah, like you pointed out, maybe exchanges, maybe some other players come in and they don't be, validation is not their business, right? They have another business, and like an exchange is a good example, right? An exchange doesn't really care about any particular network, right? They just want to have trading volume, and the fee, as long as they're trading whatever coin, they're fine, right? Is that a problem if you have, stakeholders or, people controlling a lot of the voting power, that don't have any particular, no deep interest or ties with the network itself?
I mean, these exchanges directly might not, but the customers of these exchanges do. And if they see that the token they bought, especially larger holders that are well informed about the project itself and the state of the project, that they will have to carry on the interest of the customer and do their best to help the system and provide good services as a validator. And I might even see that if the exchange grows extremely large, they will have to delegate to a hand-picked set of validators. Obviously, there's risks involved, like slashing, but I think track record will allow them to, just looking at the track record of validators, will allow them to pick a few to spread this too. I'm not sure whether this is the optimal way, as obviously this restricts the delegation to just a subset of the validators, but at some point they will have to give away that power, I think.
I think what we have to think about is it's not only that exchanges list tokens and start staking on them, at one point they will start delisting stuff, because it's not, they don't get enough reward from it, or there's bad press about it. And we have seen it many times with crypto, that the market is going up and the market is going down. And that's where I see the problems could arise if the market goes that down that they start delisting it, and you suddenly lose, let's say, 37% of your voting power on the network. If validators go away because their main business model isn't anywhere interested at this point.
Likely, the exchanges and custody services have a lot more at stake. They're probably going to put in a lot of their own, because they will probably have custody of the funds, right? At least a big portion of it, of whatever stake they get. I think they'll make sure to not get slashed. So in a sense, I think they do provide value in that they're probably going to provide really good infrastructure. And also to the community side too, because if they're passing along a lot of the rewards, the rewards to their community members, and arguably that's good for the Cosmos coin holders. But I think we just need to depend less on some of the block rewards for some of the community projects. I think that's the purpose of the community fund. We should try to deploy it and make better use of it. And there's a reason why we have grant programs as well. We need to really start activating these so that some of the project teams are less dependent on the block rewards and more dependent on some grants that would give them more freedom.
So the Cosmos network launched, right? And there was a whole lot of parameters set, right? From inflation to the number of validators to how quickly the block reward changes. how do you guys feel those parameters have been chosen, and do you think at this point that any of them should be changed? I don't know, maybe.
I don't know if it gets decided on next governance proposals to have a larger validator set. Maybe that would affect block times. Correct me if I'm wrong. So maybe block times should be taken into. Yeah.
So you think like potentially larger validator set and sort of being okay with having a slightly worse, maybe slightly worse performance and I guess slightly bigger blocks because of more.
Yeah, but we're still in the early days.
Yeah.
3 months old baby blockchain.
I would say we have to be a little bit more patient. I mean, Cosmos is so new and it has been a smooth ride in mainnet so far. So I would say like we need to figure it out before we change every like few months everything. So what I would say is rather take it slow. It's the same with like network upgrades. I hate the fact that we throw away the old chain and just start a new one every day, every time. Sorry. And then there's the fact that we say basically we're responsible to store this data somewhere, but there's no incentive to do so. So if we break away and in 10 years someone says like, wait, what was going on in Cosmos Hub 1? Like, who will have the data? Who's responsible to provide it? I think that's more the things we should think about right now than rather than what's the block time? Is it 6 or 7 seconds? I think that's not important, especially since we only have transactions right now. We don't have an IBC ready or something like that, so it's just transactions. Yeah.
Hendrik, what about you? What parameters do we change?
Which parameters do we change? The great thing is that soon we'll be able to change parameters as we just decided to activate the change parameter messages, which is a great thing in itself and proves governance works. But I think we once had a call like shortly after launch where we all discussed, an open call where we discussed exactly this thing, and some people, including me, raised concerns about slashing being very low. But actually having looked at the network at the moment, I think they've been set to just the right values. I think 5% slashing for double signature is okay at the current state of maturity of the chain. What I'm still a bit concerned about is just liveness slashing, so being allowed to lose 95% of blocks. A risk-averse actor might even think, hey, come on, I can shut down a validator for 60% of the time and not risk double signing in that time, and I will not be disincentivized except for, of course, block rewards. I think Crypto's once opened an issue and proposed an interesting way on very granular slashing for downtime, and a very interesting incentivization layer, and I think that's something one might want to look at, but I'm fully on the side that we've got more important issues to think about at the moment. One of them, and the largest of them, being how to make Cosmos Hub useful, and how to give Cosmos Hub a unique selling point, except for the validator set, so we can sustain for a long time and thrive.
Let's dive into that topic. So, what's the most important? What are the most important things that we can do in the near future to make the Cosmos Hub more useful, more powerful?
I really think education plays a very big role in governance mostly. So if you see the scenario where Poloniex, let's say, gets a decent chunk of the voting power, their delegators should know that in a governance scenario, their vote can be overridden and they can vote whatever they choose to, instead of letting the exchange decide for them.
Yeah, although Poloniex probably doesn't let you override their vote, presumably. I don't know.
It would be pretty bad to see such a big player gathering a lot of delegation and just deciding stuff in a governance scenario.
Yeah, I think As I mentioned, probably one of the most attractive properties of the Cosmos Hub is just the fact that it has all of these great validators and this really solid validator set. And I think that's something we can make immediate use of once we have IBC, of course. I think education is super important. I think this event itself is like a great step towards a better education and bringing us all together and into discussion. But it's also things like shared security that we can explore to make use of this super solid validator set to allow other side chains and zones then to make use of this, because spinning up a chain is extremely painful, and the process of getting the validator set, incentivizing them properly is really painful, and that's one pain we have to take away from them to allow this ecosystem to thrive and exist at all.
I would add user experience. I think, like, especially in the early days of the mainnet, like, there were so many questions from people because they didn't understand how the CLI works. Just that we didn't have like an audited wallet at mainnet start was really hard for people. So we really fast saw that like validators again went really creative and found different ways to solve this issue. And I think that's also part of the future. We should always innovate and just make cool gadgets around the Cosmos SDK that just makes it attractive for everyone to use it, even if you don't know how it works in the core.
Yeah, Hendrik beat me to it, but I was going to say, yeah, helping zones, spin up, it's challenging, and I mean, for us even, we're really trying to think of what would be the best way to help them. But the incentive is a bit tricky there, so I think there's a lot more to discuss. And then the second was probably get more of the community to stake. I know we have a pretty high staking ratio, but we could still do better. We could still increase the staking rate, and potentially then that would arguably help with decentralization, because we could incentivize because these people might want to try to explore other validators, and through education we could direct them to actually decentralize and diversify their delegations.
Yeah, so just briefly on the kind of like shared security launching zone thing, that we put a topic on the conference thing, so that's tomorrow afternoon. So in case anybody wants to discuss that, please join. What do you guys see as the role of the Cosmos Hub in the Cosmos network and ecosystem? In the long run, let's say 3 years from now. What's that going to look like? And how are we going to think of the Cosmos Hub? Is the Cosmos Hub going to be, what it is today, one blockchain, or is it going to be, blockchain with, DEX on it, or is the Cosmos Hub kind of going to include Bitcoin Peg, Ethereum Peg, a bunch of other maybe core utilities? Anyone have a thesis on that?
It's a hard question, but I was talking yesterday with Felix from Chorus One about that, and I think what's really interesting is that if you look at crypto today, everything flows around money, right? So we also see the decentralized finance with Ethereum and stuff like that, and I think that in the middle of every good system is the money. So I think like the Cosmos Hub will provide liquidity for all of those zones. So I could imagine it having like a stable coin on it or something like that, which all the zones around it share. Other than that, I hope it will stay pretty much in the same vision that we have right now. I don't think there should be any applications built on the hub itself, but I think that's what we'll have the IBC for. Yeah.
I think a lot of it will depend on how the final IBC spec actually looks like, and what the first zones are going to be like and how development goes there, especially also how exchanges and custodians will play the game, and whether these unique properties that the Cosmos Hub has at the moment, being decentralization, proper and solid validator set, whether that's going to stay or whether validators are going to migrate to other hubs. And that's not going to be a unique property anymore. I think it's going to depend on a lot of factors that are so hard to predict at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not going to speculate, because even Ethereum and Bitcoin, which both started as experiments, the narrative has changed drastically over time. I expect something similar for Cosmos, but I just think what's important is trying to get as many people to build on top of it and to really try to improve it. I think that's the most important part, because at the end of the day, it's all about the community, the developer community. So as long as we get that going, 5 years from now, I see it, as something something unique, something that companies real adoption, real apps that could be usable, being built on.
Yeah, I'll sort of answer that question too a little bit, and I guess it sort of alludes to the way I phrased it, right? Is that I think, if you look at the Cosmos Hub today, right, you already have, very large, like an extremely high level of economic security, right, with like a market cap of 1.3 billion or something like that, and a lot of that being staked. So in some way, it would make a lot of sense to use that to kind of guarantee some core functionalities and utilities of kind of this larger internet blockchains. So I think if you think of some, a bunch of particular stuff that is really important to have, and I would think, for example, like maybe Bitcoin and Etherpeg, like these complicated peg zones, proof of work chains could be one thing. Stablecoin could be a good idea, right? Maybe that would be part of it. Maybe DEX. So I think it might make sense, right, to have basically the same validator set and atoms securing directly. Maybe in the future be mandatory, right? You become a Cosmos validator in the hub, and you have to validate those 5 chains, exactly the same validator set and the same security. So that at least seems to be one path I could say you play out.
I sort of disagree with that. I do think the beauty of Cosmos is sovereignty and the fact that you have the choice, and so that could be one choice. But I do truly believe that the zones or hubs they should have the choice not to do so as well.
Yeah, of course. No, I'm not saying you'll have to do it, and especially application-specific zones and stuff, they would have their own validator set, I think in general. But more like if you have let's say DEX would be something that's shared across all kinds of blockchains, or Ethereum peg. It doesn't make that much sense to have a dozen different Ethereum pegs.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Okay, let's take some questions. If anybody has any questions for validators. Yeah.
As you anticipate more and more chains launching in the Cosmos ecosystem, what sort of deciding factors do you take in to validate which chains?
I think being a validator at the moment, you're just a bit like a VC fund. You have to really do due diligence on the project. You have to look at the potential market, technical potential, at the team, and all of these factors, at incentive design, the economic and token model. I think these are the various things we look at when we evaluate projects. But I think with a shared security model where governance can be a deciding factor, and also take a lot of the individual work on the one validator away from them, but just put the burden on the governance to decide. I think that's also a very interesting model for our future.
Idealistically, the future of the project, how promising it is, but frankly, we do need to keep the lights on the servers that we run, and that's sort of where again we're really thinking about how to properly set that up, because it's pretty tricky to try to to be sustainable on some of these projects.
I pretty much agree with you guys.
I would also say other validators that are on there, if you can have a great project, but if you're the only validator who's believing in it, you will not run the chain on your own. So I think that's why there's a lot of talks between validators, hey, what are you doing, and what people are sharing their vision for stuff because they know that they can't do it on their own. They need each other. So it's funny because we're all competitors sitting up here, but we also talk a lot about stuff that we will want to do in the future. And I think that's something I totally agree with the whole looking at the project, looking at the team, also like the financial stuff and everything. But I think like also the other validators that onboarded is important.
I just want to have a quick follow-on to that question. What are the actual costs involved, like concrete costs in running a new zone? I mean, if there were no costs involved, then you would just run everything, presumably. But there must be some costs that make you want to decide carefully.
I mean, it depends on which project you're talking about, right? So, like as we said with the Cosmos Hub, you have different parameters that you can tweak. So every zone will be a little bit different, I guess. And then you'll have to run the servers, for example. Like, it's non-trivial to actually run a good setup here, and it will cost you money. And if the rewards that you generate with your validator are less than what you pay for your server, you really have to believe in the long-term vision of the project that it's worth for you to pay that cost.
Is the computational load significant? So I assumed it was just actually the securing it and running it well and stuff. And I feel like if you're running one server well, it's probably pretty easy to run another virtual machine in there or something like that, or whatever you do. So I was wondering, there's also a computational cost with the scale of the hardware, and that costs a lot.
Yeah, computational cost itself is not too high. It's really a lot about maybe cost of implementation, but with Cosmos zones, like we have a lot of parallels between these setups, which makes it easy for us to automate the process of rolling them out. So it's mostly only the cost of keeping your key secure, which is basically the core, the essence of running a validator, and just having these servers and ideally distributed among different data centers and clouds. So it's really resilient, even within one validator. So costs can vary.
And labor, because we spent an insane amount of time just monitoring chats everywhere, governance, technical updates. It adds up.
Yeah, I would sort of add to this, like, at least from a Chorus One perspective, that like, okay, if you like validate on a chain, then we also want to be involved in where this chain goes and the decision making and understand it and kind of in the community and do education and content, and all of those things are like a lot of work, right? And especially like understanding these protocols where there will be differences and often documentation is not so great and information is lacking. So I think the whole, like all of that is a lot of work, right? And if you just want to sort of run a node and you don't really care so much about the details, then of course that part is, especially if it's built on Cosmos SDK, you can basically reuse almost everything, maybe not that high, but that kind of also ties a lot into what should be the role of the validators on the chain.
Hi guys, thanks for joining us today. So I'm going to be the jerk who makes a comment, could have asked a question. Heard someone say that at launch we have an audited wallet ready.
Yes.
And there's something that I actually fell over in communicating when I was running audits for our launch. Part of the reason that we were a little behind on that front was that very late in the game, we made very significant architectural changes to the wallet that we were developing. And we also chose to have that be an independent thing. The ICF ended up funding it on its own. But we spun that out and made those decisions so late in the process. We did have an audit kick off a few weeks into the time, but we had to give them time to basically rebuild the thing. And so I feel bad on one side because I would have liked to have had it, but the architectural changes we made were such a big deal and so much of an improvement on the security side for the user that I'm sad we didn't land on time and our flight was late, but it's cool we got there. So.
Yeah, and finally it works, right? So that's great, but I think the only thing I was saying was that the user in the beginning, it was really hard because the only thing that was officially put out there was the CLI.
Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Totally feel you on that. Sorry, I just couldn't let it rest.
Sure.
I guess that's
So as commissions go down and sort of validators become sort of ubiquitous from the point of view of delegator, how should delegators choose a validator, and how do you guys think about sort of differentiating yourselves from each other and like, providing added services or whatever? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be hard because actually the things you write on your website, the delegator cannot verify if they are true or not. And if you look at the details, like how people choose, like if you ask them why did you choose us, it's mostly like, oh, I looked at this block explorer and I choose one of the top X validators. Like I picked one out, I liked the website and it was okay. So I think it's really hard to differentiate yourself in the space. But what I think you can do is just be active everywhere, try to help people out if they are in problems, and basically build stuff where people say, yeah, that's useful for me. For example, we currently developing our staking dashboard, which is really interesting if people start to realize that they have to pay taxes on their staking rewards. And suddenly, I mean, Cosmos Hub 1 isn't available anymore, the data isn't on any node where you can query it, and we say, yeah, okay, we give you everything for your tax report, you just click one button and you download it. That's a value that we can give you that maybe other validators can't. So ultimately, I think that it's just about what services can you get your customer that others can't, or worse of a job by.
There will be, I know, I'm aware of at least one project working on rating validators. I mean, there will be rating services basically out there because you need that, and then with that, potentially you could put on insurance products on that as well, because eventually validators will like to have insurance as well. So I think rating products is just a core necessity. Like it will come for sure, and it's very hard to compare security infrastructure between amongst validators because no one is going to disclose too much because talking about security itself is the most insecure part of infrastructure security.
Yeah, I think I also believe in that review part for a bit. There's two kinds of reviews. There's just a review speaking with the validator, interviewing them and asking them for details, which I can totally lie about. I can have my validator running in my basement and advertise a tier 4 data center with active validation and using the ledger, whatever product, to secure my keys. So I think at some point we'll start seeing really companies doing proper audits of these validators and provable audits. And I think once reviews reach that kind of professionalism, there will be factors where you can decide between different validators. And of course you have the added value that the validators can provide, but obviously there will be validators also playing in the category number 1, working with custodians, exchanges, and I think there's a whole set of different niches in which a validator can fit, and I think that's how they will set themselves apart.
Yeah, I would add, so of course, yeah, security is obviously one thing, right? Because the getting slashed is a big risk. So, I mean, we for example, did a security audit, small security audit, but at least one. But I think the other way that, as a token holder, I think it makes sense to think of it, is if you, if you look at commission rates, if you look at the atom price, right, it's of course highly volatile. And the future of the network, it could be massive or it could fail, and the kind of delta there is just enormous. And I think, so far, right, validators have a very valuable role in the network. And so I think to choose validators based on to what extent do they help and maximize the actual probability of success of the project, is it's kind of the right thing to do, as opposed to, let's say there may be some new, a bunch of validators that may not add much value, but let's say they do like 1% commission or 0% commission or something like that. Which okay, in the short term maybe you save a little bit of money. But, I mean, certainly if that happens at scale in the network, I do think Cosmos will not end up succeeding. Maybe you can kind of get away with it, it's just yourself, but I don't think it's good for the network.
Yeah, and I also think one more distinguishing factor is that validators are kind of political parties in a way when it comes to governance decisions. Of course you can override them, But if you can trust your validator to decide with a specific mentality that you know that they advertise, I think it's also a factor that you can use to choose, or you don't choose at all and just hedge your risk over 20, 30, 50 even validators, which is totally also an option for the future when validation is more or less commoditized and you just hedge your risk over more because security differences will be so insignificant.
Hey guys, this is Jack. We talked about a number of pain points today already, I think especially around upgrades. I definitely hear that one. Besides upgrades, what are the biggest pain points that you guys will, like, what is the biggest pain point that you guys are running into that you'd like to see fixed? And alternatively, what's the feature that you guys are most looking forward to? Not IBC, but yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll start with one thing, and I can tie it into what Florian said, right? So just the data on rewards and being able to basically have a proper data of like who earned how much at what time. So that's something that's, and yeah, then the data being missed with chain upgrades or like not there properly. So I think that's a big, substantial issue at the moment.
Just a quick side note on that. Baz is upstairs fixing the event reporting, so we will have better reporting after the next upgrade.
Okay.
Thank you.
For me, it's two parts. One is regulatory unclarity. Blockchain crypto the entire space is relatively new, and the regulatory bodies are just catching up to it. Within it, proof of stake is even newer, and so it seems like there's even less clarity on that front. So this is sort of out of, I think, the Tendermint's team, it's out of everyone's reach right now, right? But the best we could do is try to talk a lot with the regulatory bodies and lawyers to clear things out. Another is the governance talks, I think, are a little too dispersed, meaning like it's happening on way too many channels. And it's very difficult for validators to track them. I can't imagine how it feels for community members. So I feel like that there needs to be more standardization of how these discussions are happening.
This is Dean. So there's a spectrum of validating for yourself versus validating for others, and there's analogies in the pre-blockchain world of custodian services or fiduciary responsibility to your customers, or any of weaker such assertions. Have you guys talked about that, or thought about that, or thought about when validating for others, what kind of assurances you'd like to be certified for, or provide, or compete on, or what have you?
I mean, for us as validators also focus on compliance, we work closely with our fund clients, and it obviously also means having some kind of off-chain assurance, which means a really well thought through and reviewed contract with them that ensures them specific details like a reward SLA and specific other points when it comes to governance decisions, etc. So we definitely are thinking about these kind of things, and it's constantly being developed. With the more funds we speak, the more we learn about our own contracts and what the actual requirements of these customers are. And obviously they are totally different from a normal retail delegator. And I think that's something quite a few validators are looking into, and it's extremely important to take care of these things, especially also looking at liability of a validator, looking at slashing risk, etc.
So we have time for one last question, and then discussions can continue over at the party, just over where we were having lunch.
I was wondering if you feel that, if all you feel that it's unethical for validators to hack each other, or if that's good for the system and part of the security model.
Are you aware of such threat?
No, I just theoretically from the white paper.
Oh yeah, from the white paper there was the hacking in transaction where you could claim a bit, I think, and get a bounty for hacking a validator. I think there's a few factors, one of them being the law preventing you from doing such things. There can be 1,000 things written down in the white paper. A court will probably have a different opinion about these kind of things. But obviously, it's an exciting thought, and we are all. I mean, what we think about when we're working on our validator setups is hardening it as much as possible to make exactly these kind of attacks, not by another validator, but by an outside attacker, as hard as possible, and ideally mostly impossible, which doesn't exist in security, but as hard as possible. I think that's our job in the end as validators.
I mean, we're all here because we're going to be around in the validator space, at least for the foreseeable future. We're going to see each other constantly, and I do want to keep smiling when I meet my fellow validators. So, like, I think it's unlikely for validators to be hacking each other, but outside attacks definitely are a possibility.
I mean, we had Game of Stakes, and for a limited amount of time, it was really funny to see people go offline. It's not that funny if real money is involved, and not just you or your other, like your competitors, but there's users' money involved in this. So I think, all the good points were said about this, yeah.
Well, yeah, and then you bring up, it's an interesting point because you've acted maliciously, so hypothetically, you're probably going to lose a lot of your stake, unless your delegator really loves hacking.
Exactly, and I would say if one of the validators here finds a bug in the setup of another one, the thing probably what would happen is the same like if there's a bug in the Cosmos SDK phone, which we had recently, that there's a quiet communication between those two parties to ensure that the network itself gets hardened and not to hurt someone just because it's funny or just because you're better than them.
Yeah, I think we're stronger together, growing the whole of the cake and making the market bigger.
Well, Hendrik, that was a wonderful note to end on. So yeah, thanks so much for all the great questions.